For most of my life, I genuinely believed I had found God. I was raised in Christianity, surrounded by churches, prayers, and verses that were meant to bring peace. I learned about love, hope, and salvation through sermons and songs that echoed in my ears since childhood. And yet, deep within, a strange emptiness lingered. I wanted to feel connected to God, to understand Him, not just through rituals or emotional moments, but in a way that satisfied both my heart and my reason. As I grew older, that yearning only intensified. I started asking questions, not to challenge, but to understand. And each time, I was told to just believe or have faith. But how could I have faith when the very foundations didn't make sense? I began noticing contradictions, questions that had no clear answers. Why would God need to become a man? Why would salvation depend on someone else's sacrifice instead of my own actions? Why did the concept of God seem so complex when I believed God should be the source of perfect clarity? These doubts were not out of rebellion, but from a sincere desire to know the truth. My faith wasn't weakening, it was evolving. I wasn't trying to escape Christianity, I was trying to get closer to God, and that path led me somewhere I never expected: Islam. At first, I was hesitant. Islam had always felt foreign, something distant and unfamiliar. But curiosity pushed me forward. I started reading, listening, watching, not to debate, but to understand. What I found was unlike anything I had ever known. Islam didn't ask me to believe blindly. It invited me to think. It didn't offer stories to make me feel good. It gave me a message that spoke to my soul and answered the questions I had buried for years. The concept of one God, without partners, without intermediaries, struck me like lightning. It was so simple, yet so powerful. God was not a man. God didn't die. God didn't need anything. Islam's God was majestic, eternal, above all. The Quran didn't feel like a book written by men. It felt like a voice that had been waiting for me all along. Every verse called me to reflect, to look within, and to seek truth sincerely. This journey didn't happen overnight, but slowly, the fog began to clear. The more I learned, the more everything made sense, not just in theory, but in practice. Islam didn't erase my past, it explained it. It didn't force me to abandon belief. It showed me how to complete it. For the first time in my life, I didn't just believe in God. I understood who He is, and in that understanding, I found the peace I had been searching for all along. I remember the exact moment when I realized my questions had become too heavy to ignore. I was sitting in church, listening to yet another sermon about salvation and grace, but instead of feeling uplifted, I felt lost. The words sounded beautiful, but they didn't connect with my heart anymore. I kept wondering why a loving and all-powerful God would require blood to forgive. Why would He need to become a man, suffer, and die just to save the people He created? These questions were not attacks on my faith. They were cries from my soul for understanding. I was desperate to feel close to God, to know Him as He truly is, not through layers of mystery or theology, but in His purest form. I started searching quietly, almost fearfully, because I didn't want to seem like I was doubting. But deep inside I was. I read books, watched videos, and asked questions. The more I explored, the more confused I became. Christianity offered love, yes, but it also brought a deep internal struggle. How could God be three yet one? How could Jesus be fully God and fully man, yet pray to the Father? Why was salvation based on something I didn't even choose, on a sacrifice that took place long before I was born? These weren't just academic puzzles. They were barriers standing between me and the peace I was seeking. Then I came across Islam, not through debate, but through silence. One night, out of frustration, I searched online for what Muslims believe about God. What I found stunned me. The idea that God is one, absolutely one, with no sons, no partners, no equals, hit something deep in me. It made sense. It was clear. It was powerful. God didn't need to become human to understand us. He already knew us. He didn't need to die to forgive. He could forgive whom He wills. Islam's message about God was not just simple. It was majestic. It didn't reduce God to our level. It raised my understanding of Him to where it belonged. That clarity began changing everything. I wasn't looking for a new religion. I was looking for the truth. And as I read more about Islam, I realized I wasn't walking away from God. I was finally walking toward Him, freely, consciously, and with a heart ready to surrender to something that finally made sense. I had always associated Islam with rules, rituals, and a distant God, one you had to fear rather than love. Growing up, that's the image I had absorbed from the media, from conversations around me, and from sermons that warned us about other religions. So even when my doubts about Christianity grew louder, Islam was never on my list of options. I thought it would only add more confusion. But curiosity pushed me to at least understand what Muslims believed, not to agree with it, just to understand it for myself, without filters, without opinions. And that single step changed everything. The first thing that struck me was how Muslims spoke about God, not as a mystery or a concept wrapped in centuries of theological debate, but as the one and only, eternal, absolute, nearer than your jugular vein, and yet above all of creation. He wasn't described through human stories or limited by human traits. He was simply God, and it made sense. There was no contradiction, no confusion, no attempt to fit the divine into the mold of humanity. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was hearing about God, not a part of Him, not a version of Him, but the truth of Him. Then I read the opening chapter of the Quran. Just 7 verses, but in those few lines, I found more clarity and power than I had ever encountered. It didn't ask me to believe in a sacrifice or decode divine mysteries. It invited me to recognize my Creator, to worship Him alone, and to seek His guidance. Simple, direct, and incredibly profound. I realized I didn't need intermediaries to reach God. I didn't need a priest, a ritual, or a cross. Just sincerity, just intention, just me and Him. What shocked me most was how Islam didn't compete with my desire to love God. It fulfilled it. It gave me a way to live that love every day, through prayer, through discipline, through kindness, through justice. It didn't separate faith from life. It infused life with faith. I wasn't trading one belief system for another. I was letting go of confusion and stepping into a relationship built on truth, reason, and connection with the one who created me. And for the first time, that connection felt real. When I finally sat down alone with the Quran, it wasn't out of religious zeal or a desire to change my faith. It was simply out of exhaustion. I was mentally and spiritually drained. Years of trying to make sense of doctrines I didn't fully believe and had left me feeling hollow. I wanted clarity. I wanted peace. And I didn't care where it came from anymore, as long as it was real. I had heard many things about the Quran, that it was repetitive, harsh, or too complex. But when I opened it myself, what I found was something entirely different. It didn't speak to me like a book. It spoke to me like a voice that already knew me. Every verse felt like it had been written for someone searching, someone like me. It didn't try to entertain or impress. It just told the truth, that this life is temporary, that we were created with a purpose, that there is a Creator who sees everything, knows everything, and guides those who truly want to be guided. There were no puzzles, no contradictions, no divine loopholes, just direct communication from God to the heart of the reader. And it shook me, not because it was poetic or emotional, but because it was honest. I remember reading the verses about the heavens and the earth, about the precision of creation, about the souls who forget God and the ones who remember Him in humility. It wasn't just a book of laws or stories. It was a mirror. It showed me who I had become and who I could be. It held me accountable, but it also gave me hope. It didn't ask me to be perfect. It asked me to be sincere, and that was something I had never heard from any other religious text or sermon in my life. The Quran didn't demand belief before it offered understanding. It invited me to reflect, to think, and to question. It didn't insult my doubts. It welcomed them. It answered them with patience and logic. I didn't feel forced to accept anything. I felt guided, slowly, surely, gently. What started as a moment of desperation turned into the beginning of a journey that would completely redefine my connection with God. Not through mystery or emotion, but through truth and submission. And for the first time, I felt like I was finally walking the path I was always meant to be on. There was a turning point when I came across a verse that said, "Indeed, in the remembrance of God do hearts find rest." That one sentence shattered years of spiritual frustration. I had been chasing peace through rituals I didn't understand, through prayers I didn't feel, and through beliefs that constantly left me with questions. But here was a simple reminder. Peace wasn't in the noise, it was in remembrance. Real, conscious remembrance of the one who made me. It wasn't about emotional hype or spiritual performances. It was about reconnecting with the source. What struck me most was how Islam connected belief with action. It wasn't enough to say you believe, you had to live it. You had to prove it in your character, in your patience, in your kindness to others. I had never seen a religion so deeply tied to daily life. In Christianity, I often felt that belief was personal and private, something hidden within the heart. But Islam showed me that true belief transforms how you live, how you eat, how you speak, how you sleep. It was a way of life, not just a belief system. And that, to me, was powerful. Prayer became a moment of peace rather than pressure. Fasting became a way to discipline my desires, not just an act of deprivation. Every rule had a purpose, every command had wisdom behind it. I wasn't doing things to earn points. I was doing them because I wanted to please the one who gave me everything. And this desire didn't come from fear, it came from love. A deep, overwhelming love for a God who is not silent or distant, but present and close. The more I read, the more I saw how Islam nurtured balance. It didn't push you to extremes. It didn't glorify suffering, nor did it promise constant ease. It taught me that life is a test, but a test with purpose. That God is not unjust. That every hardship comes with ease. That every sincere effort is seen. Islam didn't offer blind faith. It offered a roadmap, one that aligned perfectly with reason and fit naturally with the human soul. I wasn't surrendering my mind or my heart. I was finally using both. And through that, I found a peace I never knew I was missing. One of the most transformative moments for me was realizing how Islam redefined my concept of God entirely. I had grown up with a view of the divine that felt confusing and distant. I was told that love was the foundation, yet I often feared that I wasn't doing enough, wasn't good enough, or was too far from salvation to be seen or heard by God. In Islam, I encountered a message that was both majestic and deeply personal. God wasn't abstract, he was near, not in need of anything, yet responsive to even the smallest whisper of a heart that turned to him. What shocked me was how often the Quran spoke of God's mercy, how it introduced him over and over again as the most merciful, the especially merciful. Before any command, any story, any warning, there was always mercy. And this wasn't a mercy reserved for saints or scholars. It was for the sinner, the struggler, the broken, for people like me. It made me realize that my past didn't disqualify me. In fact, it was my return, my sincere effort to come back, that mattered most. Islam gave me permission to start over, without guilt chaining me to who I used to be. Another powerful shift was how Islam viewed prophets. Instead of being divine or unreachable, they were human beings, messengers chosen by God, but still men who felt hunger, who cried, who struggled, who prayed. Their lives weren't fairy tales. They were stories of perseverance, faith, and real-world challenges. It made their message more relatable. It made faith feel grounded. I wasn't being asked to believe in supernatural contradictions. I was being invited to follow a clear, logical path walked by the best examples of humanity. The simplicity of Islam amazed me. The declaration of faith was one line, but that line changed everything. It affirmed that God is one, without partner, and that Muhammad is his final messenger. That was it. No layered theology, no tangled hierarchy, no mystical barriers, just God and his guidance. And that guidance didn't demand I be perfect. It asked that I be sincere, consistent, and humble. I didn't become a different person overnight, but slowly I became someone who finally felt grounded, someone who didn't need to chase meaning in 1,000 places. I had found the truth, and with it came direction, dignity, and a sense of belonging I had never experienced before. What truly sealed my heart to Islam was the clarity it offered about purpose, identity, and the hereafter. For most of my life, I had questions that no one around me could answer with certainty. Why are we really here? What does God actually want from us? What happens when we die? I used to hear vague responses about mystery and faith, but they left me feeling empty, like I was meant to just accept confusion as a part of spirituality. But when I began reading about Islam, those same questions were answered directly, beautifully, and with certainty. It didn't dismiss my questions. It honored them. Islam told me I was created by design, not accident, that I was born with a purpose, to worship the Creator, to do good, to live justly, and to strive for truth. Suddenly, my life had direction. Every action, every intention could have meaning. Even a smile, a kind word, or feeding a hungry animal, everything was part of the worship of God. It transformed the way I looked at everyday life. Nothing was meaningless anymore. Every day was a chance to grow closer to the one who created me. Death no longer felt terrifying, it felt like a doorway. Islam didn't paint the afterlife as a mystery to be guessed at or interpreted through symbols. It was real, clear, and consistent. The idea that I would stand before my Creator, not to be condemned for doubts, but to be judged with justice and mercy, brought me peace. I no longer feared death in the same way. I feared living without purpose more than I feared dying with faith. What also touched me deeply was the idea of accountability. In Islam, there was no inherited sin. I wasn't carrying the burden of others. I would be responsible only for my own choices, my own heart. That was liberating. It made me stop blaming others and start taking ownership of my journey. Islam didn't expect perfection, but it demanded sincerity, effort, and humility. That resonated with me deeply. And finally, it was the sense of global brotherhood that moved me. When I said the words of Shahada, I wasn't just accepting Islam. I was joining a family of over 1 billion people who turn to the same Qibla, read the same book, follow the same prophet. There was no superiority by race or wealth or status, only by piety and character. That sense of unity, equality, and shared purpose was something I had never experienced before. Islam didn't just answer my questions, it gave me peace. Today, I look back at my journey not with regret, but with gratitude. Every doubt, every moment of confusion, every late night question led me to the truth I had been seeking all along. Islam didn't demand that I ignore my logic or silence my heart. It welcomed both. It gave me answers, direction, peace, and most importantly, a connection with the Creator that felt natural, pure, and unshackable. For anyone who feels lost or stuck between faith and confusion, know this: seeking truth is not a weakness, it's courage. And if you walk that path sincerely, you'll be surprised where it leads. For me, it led to Islam, a faith that didn't just explain everything, it healed everything. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it brings comfort, reflection, or maybe even clarity to someone out there who needs it. May your journey be guided with light, just as mine was.